Well, hello. Welcome to another session of our Bible study on the book of Esther. And as you can see, it's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. I hope you're doing well today. This is the third session on our Bible study on the book of Esther. We're going to be talking about the second chapter of Esther today. And it's such a beautiful day, I thought I would come outside to share this study with you. Just before I came out to do the study, received an email that there is a llama that is loose in our neighborhood. El Ray is just delighted, hoping that while I'm doing this study, maybe a llama might come up behind me. So if that happens, that will be unprecedented. Don't know that's ever happened in the history of Bible studies. But I hope you're doing well. And we're in the midst of a pandemic. There's so many things going on in our life. And so we're going to open the ancient book of Esther. And while it may appear to be an old book and an ancient book, there are lessons that we can learn that will make a difference in our life today. Would you pray with me? Oh God, surrounded by the beauty of your creation, we thank you for the gift of your word, a word that is living, a word that is relevant, and a word that is powerful. Speak to our hearts through this ancient word. We pray in the name of the living word. Amen. When you first look at the book of Esther, it seems like a fairy tale. What's not to love about this story? It starts out with an elaborate party, and then there is a search throughout the whole kingdom for the most beautiful girls. And then there is Esther, who is crowned the queen and saves her people. It's kind of a Cinderella type story, don't you think? But it's hardly. There's so much more going on, and it's not a fairy tale by any stretch of the imagination. While on the surface, this may be a story of wine, women, and song, this is really a story of power and deceit and manipulation. This is a story that speaks to every generation. Let me share a statement with you, and I think we'll see this statement become true as we study this second chapter. Power distorts reality and demands conformity to a worldwide view created by those at the top until someone challenges the rules. Okay, go back and listen to that again. Power distorts reality and demands conformity to a worldview created by those at the top until somebody comes along and challenges that view or challenges those rules. That's exactly what has happened in the book of Esther. That is what will continue to happen in the book of Esther. We started out with a lavish display of wealth and power, with that party that went on for a whole week. That was after really a longer party that had lasted for 6 months. It was a display of power and wealth and control. It was creating a distorted reality. You see, King Xerxes, the king of Persia, wanted everybody to believe that he had ultimate power and authority, and his kingdom was a fairy tale-like kingdom, and nothing could change that. And so there was a week-long binge of drinking, and everybody was invited to join in this elaborate party. The wine was poured and flowing. There was food, there was dancing, there was singing, and then finally, the drunken king orders his wife Vashti to come and put herself on display so that she could be shamed and objectified, and she refuses to do it. That's what happens in the first chapter. Vashti had the courage to challenge the distorted view of reality created by the king and all of his yes men. And now he's upset. Now he's angry. He calls all of his merry men together. This is really a satire. And it's comical to read everything that's going on, everything that's taking place. So he has these 7 advisors, and they have crazy names. They have silly names. He calls them together. It's a national crisis. My wife won't do what I'm asking her to do. And they said, this is a crisis of unprecedented proportions. And we're going to have a decree that every man is the king of his own house, and his wife has to submit every command that he has. Otherwise, we're going to lose control. I mean, it's comical, but that's exactly what they do. He calls all of his merry men. They're all his yes men. Their views of reality have been distorted by the enticement of power. They meet in a panic, and they decree that every man is the king of his own house. How silly is that? But Queen Vashti is the one who has the courage to challenge the rules, to say this isn't the way life really is. And she says no. Now, Vashti disappears. But if you have your Bible, now open to the book of Esther, to the 2nd chapter, and I want you to look at the first verse. After these things, when the anger of King Ahasuerus, you may have a translation that says Xerxes. This was actually King Xerxes. After his anger had abated, he remembered Vashti. You really get the impression that he was having second thoughts. Some of you might use the Message. This is exactly what it says in the Message. Later, when Queen Xerxes' anger had cooled, and he was having second thoughts about what Vashti had done and what he had ordered against her, the king's young attendant stepped in and got the ball rolling, saying, "Let's begin a search for the most beautiful young virgins for the king." Once you have created an alternative reality, you have to keep it going. The king woke up. He had a bad headache. His anger had calmed down. His hangover was gone. And he thought to himself, what in the world have I done? And you get the impression that he might have gone back and corrected that. But his advisors wouldn't let it, because they had created this distorted view of reality, and they didn't want anything to damage that. They didn't want to have another reality. You see, if you tell a lie, then you have to tell another lie to cover it up, and then another one, and then another one. So that's really what is going on here. They succeeded in getting rid of Vashti. Unfortunately, the church has perpetuated this. If you have a church, now we in the Baptist church, we often use readings from the lectionary, but I don't always follow the lectionary. But in churches that do follow the lectionary, you will never find the first chapter of Esther. In fact, there are very few readings from Esther, period, in the lectionary. It's like Vashti has disappeared. For just a minute, I want us to think about her as being a hero, because she had the courage to challenge the king and his distorted view of reality. She had the courage to say no. I will not be used. I will not be exploited. I am more than a cheap thrill. I am more than a decorative display. I am a human being, a person of integrity and a person of worth. And here I draw the line and I say no. Have you noticed that we don't really have many heroes or role models, even of biblical characters, who say no? And there are a lot of times that's what we need. Think about a situation where you have somebody who has a job and maybe their boss asks them to do something that they know is wrong, might even be illegal. Do they have the courage to say no? If I say I'm not going to do this, then my boss is not going to be happy with me, then I might even lose my job. What about our young people? Do they have the courage to say no when they're in a situation in which they're tempted to do the wrong thing? They're at a party. Somebody hands them a pill. I say, go ahead and take it. It's not going to hurt you. It'll make you feel so good. They know it's wrong. Do they have the courage to say no? And how many girls, maybe they're in a situation at home where they are demeaned, they're not respected, their parents talk down to them, they don't have any sense of self-respect, they don't have any security, and they have a boyfriend, and the boyfriend makes them feel like they're somebody, like they're important. And then he says to her, you know, if you really love me, you'll have sex with me. It'll just make everything better. Creating a distorted sense of reality. Do they have the courage to say no? And think about all the times that they have given in and their life has been changed forever. We need to hold up Vashti as one who had the courage to stand up against the power brokers and the authority and to say no because she was being asked to do something that would be demeaning. Not only to her, but to all women. And maybe by her saying no, she inspired the women of the kingdom. Maybe even Esther had the courage to stand up and to do what she would do to save her people. I think about one of my heroes in the faith, and many of you know the story of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I think when we look at the 20th century and we look at the martyrs of the 20th century, he is definitely at the very top of the list. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a theologian, a pastor. At the beginning of the Nazi movement, there were so many church leaders who fell victim to the distorted view of reality that Hitler presented. And see, they liked Hitler. They thought he was a little crazy. He was fanatical. But he stood for the same things that they stood for. He was going to protect the church and protect the values of the church. And so they bought into it. And they created a state church. Well, we know what happened. It wasn't long before they realized they had been used, but it was too late to get out of it. But Bonhoeffer saw the writing on the wall. He saw it early. You know, Bonhoeffer in the 1930s went to the United States, to New York, where he was teaching in Union Theological Seminary, he had the opportunity to stay safely in the States during the Second World War. But he didn't do that. Here was a man of courage, and here was a man of conviction. So he went back to Germany, and he had the courage to say no to the state church. And what a wonderful story it is about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Of course, Bonhoeffer was arrested, and literally days before Hitler committed suicide, one of the last orders he gave was for Dietrich Bonhoeffer to be executed. When Joyce and I had the opportunity to go to Germany when we were on sabbatical last year, one of the inspirational highlights of our journey was to go to the Bonhoeffer house. Now, Dietrich Bonhoeffer never owned a house in his life, but his parents purchased a house on the outskirts of Berlin. And I had done a little research. I found out that there was a Bonhoeffer house, and I found out on Saturday morning they had a tour of the house in English. So that Saturday morning, I had the address. I wrote the address down. We got a taxi in front of our hotel. I gave the address to the taxi driver, and we took off on a journey. The city of Berlin is one of the largest cities in the world geographically. I mean, it's larger than New York City. To go from one end of that city to the other would take you, I don't know how long. But let me tell you, it took us a long, long time before we finally got in the residential neighborhood. I kept watching the meter, and of course we're talking about euros. It went over 20 euros, and then 21 and 22. And then finally the taxi driver was slowing down, and we were just in the midst of a residential area. And I was thinking, is he lost? Wonder where he's taking us. And finally he stops in front of a house, and in broken English he says, "This is it." And I look at the house, and there's no sign. You know, I'm thinking there's going to be a sign. There's going to be something to identify it. There's nothing. And I also looked at that meter, and I thought, we better get out of here. This is going to cost us a fortune. So I paid the taxi driver, and he drove off. And I looked, and there was a little bronze plaque on the gate of the house, and it said in German, Bonhoeffer Haus. And I said, oh, this is it. So we started to open the gate to go in. Gate was locked. I thought, oh my goodness. How are we going to get back to the hotel? And there was a button, like a doorbell on the gate, so I pushed it, and a minute later, some large guy opens the front door and said, reach inside the gate and open it. And we did, and we went inside. And there were a couple of other folks. Ended up, there were probably only 7 or 8 folks, all of us from the U.S. And we sat around a table, and I started to say we talked about Bonhoeffer. That's what I was hoping we would do, but our host did all the talking. And he didn't speak English very well, and it went on and on. But finally, after about 50 minutes, he said, we're going upstairs. There's only one room in that house that has been restored historically, and that was Bonhoeffer's room. We went up in that room, and as we stood there, I knew that I was standing on holy ground. It was in that room that the SS agents came and arrested Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was taken away from his parents' home, and he would never be a free man again. In fact, less than a year later, on the 9th of April, 1945, he lost his life because he had the courage to say no. So Queen Vashti is a wonderful example that we should hold up in the church. There are times when this alternate view of reality must be challenged. And that is exactly what Queen Vashti did. Let's look at the second chapter, and we're going to be introduced to Mordecai in the 5th verse. Well, let me back up a minute. I may not have covered this, but after Vashti was banished, then the age came in and said, we're going to have a search. We're going to find the most beautiful girl in the whole kingdom. That's why it sounds a little bit like a fairy tale. And so they start this search, but we're introduced to a guy by the name of Mordecai. Now, Mordecai, we are told, his lineage goes back to the house of Kish, who was the father of Saul, who was the first king of Israel. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. It was his family was brought to Babylon after Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem in the Babylonian captivity. He had brought up his uncle's daughter. So that would mean she was his cousin. She actually has 2 names in the book of Esther. The name of Hadassah is her Jewish name. And that name is significant. The rabbis would comment on all of this scripture, and they said if you add up the numerical value of the letters in her Jewish name, you come up with the number 75. 75, Abraham was 75 when the Lord called him to go to the promised land. So therefore, that number is significant. Esther is being called to go. Now, Esther is her Persian name, and it means star, and she is truly the star of this story. She was an orphan, raised by her cousin, and we're told that she was absolutely beautiful, absolutely what the king was looking for in his quest for the next king. So she is taken away from Mordecai. While it sounds like a fairy tale, she goes into this harem. We're told about the 12 months of preparation. It sounds like she's in a perpetual spa with all of these bath oils and ointments and beauty treatments and all of that. But there's a whole lot more to the story. Once they are brought into this harem, they never come out. They are never allowed to return home. They never find a husband, have children, raise a family. Their fate is sealed. For 12 months, they are prepared for their night with the king. Now, before we get to that part, I want you to look at the 11th verse. The 11th verse of the 2nd chapter. This is a poignant moment. It says, every day, Mordecai walked in to the front of the court of the harem. He just wanted to hear. He didn't get to see Esther, but he wanted to hear from her. He probably talked to some of the guards and, oh yeah, she's doing fine, she's doing fine. They might have been able to exchange messages, we really don't know. But he just wanted to be close to her because he knew that they would be separated from this point on. And then we're told about this process, a year-long process to prepare the virgins for their one night with the king. Just as those golden goblets in the lavish parties that are described in the 1st chapter, just as they're scrubbed and polished and they're beautiful and they're perfect, these girls are scrubbed and polished. so they will be perfect for the king. Now, while it sounds lavish, and I guess people that like this kind of stuff, I mean, if you like going to the spa, if you like beauty treatments, then you probably think this is a pretty good deal. But actually, there's some code words here. One of the spices, and it is in, let's see, what verse is it in? It talks about myrrh. It talks about the ointments and the spices. It's in verse 12. The word myrrh, the root of that is bitter. Remember when Naomi came back to Bethlehem and they said, Naomi's back home, and she says, don't call me Naomi. That meant sweetness, but call me Mara, because life is now bitter. There was a bitterness to this, because you see, they're being prepared for one night, for their night with the king. Now, there's something here that I want to point out to you that speaks about really how tragic this was. Look at the 13th verse. When the maiden went in to the king, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. Let me tell you what that's talking about. It's not talking about picking up the free toiletries in the hotel, the amenities. It's not talking about oils and bath oils and spices and bubble bath and stuff like that. These are just girls, teenage girls. They're still children. You know how a child will maybe have something like a security blanket or a stuffed animal that sometimes they carry them with them to college. It's just that reminder, just that security. That's what it's talking about. These are just children. They're about to be brought in for their, quote, night with the king. They're about to lose their innocence. And so there's a poignancy that they can take maybe a reminder of their innocence and a reminder of their childhood with them. They go in, they spend the night, and then they leave. But they don't go back to the same harem. They go to a different one, because now they're no longer virgins, they are concubines. For most of these girls, can you tell them outside? I think that's a helicopter. That might be the Baptist helicopter going over. I hope it's not going to pick somebody up. I'll get back with you in just a second. Well, I can't see which one that is. We're actually on the flight path into the Davidson County or the Lexington airport. And so, and you know, there's a Baptist helicopter that is there. So that's probably what that was. But they come out of their night with the king and their concubines. Most of these girls will never see the king again. They live the rest of their life. I mean, it's not a bad life, but it's not their life. As I said, they can't leave and go back home. They can't marry. They can't have a family. Some of them he'll call back as concubines. But when Queen Esther goes, and we're told that she didn't have any favorite animal or blanket that she carried with her. She pleased everybody. The eunuch that looked after her really thought the world of her. She was a delightful person. And she found favor in the eyes of everyone. So she goes in and spends her night with the king, and the king decides this is it. She is going to be my next queen. And so he crowns her Queen Esther. And he celebrates. He alleviates some of the taxes. He gave gifts to different people and all of this kind of stuff. So everybody's happy now. But meanwhile, back at the gate, Mordecai still goes to the gate every day. And he discovers a plot to assassinate the king. And it's a plot by two of his eunuchs. Historical fact. King Xerxes was assassinated by two of his eunuchs. And so this certainly has some validity in history. But the deal is, and there comes that helicopter again, so it's obviously not Baptist Hospital. The deal is, he tells Esther, he gets the word to Esther about the plot. She tells the king, of course, she said, my cousin Mordecai is the one who informed me. He's delighted. Mordecai has a good name with the king now, which is important. Esther, it just adds to her credibility with the king. The two guys are executed. It says they were hanged on the gallows. That's what the duct tape Bible says. I don't want to tell you how they were actually killed. Hanging would be merciful. I'll just put it that way. And we're going to see more of that as we go through the book of Esther. Let's go back to that statement that we had at the very beginning of this study. Power distorts reality and demands conformity to a worldview created by those at the top until someone challenges the rules. There was a young girl from Pakistan. I know you've heard of her. Most people just call her by her first name, Malayla. Malayla grew up in Pakistan. Her father was a teacher. He ran a girls' school in their village. Malayla said she loved school. Of course, her father was the leader of the school and everything was just great. But then the Taliban took over. She said when the Taliban took over, everything changed. They banned owning a television, playing music. They enforced harsh punishment to those who defied the orders. And one of the orders was that girls could no longer go to school. They didn't need to be educated. That was in 2008. And so she said goodbye to her classmates. And she didn't know whether she would ever go to school again. But she started to feel very strongly that it was important not only for her to get an education, but for all girls to be educated. In 2012, she had spoken out publicly about the importance of education, and she had actually gone back to school. She was on the school bus on her way home. All of a sudden, there was a masked gunman who stopped the bus, who got on the bus, and who asked, "Where is Malayla?" He shot her in the head, left her to die. 10 days later, she woke up in a hospital in England. The doctors and the nurses told her what had happened. The whole world had found out about this tragedy. Everybody was praying for her. Everybody was pulling for her to recover, and she did. She went through months of surgeries and rehabilitation. Everybody was outraged by the actions of the Taliban. But Malayla decided that she would use her newfound notoriety to stand up for girls who were being oppressed, for those who found themselves in a distorted view of reality when those who had the power and the authority established the rules, because she was courageous enough to speak up against the rules. Some of you know that in the year 2014, she became the youngest person to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. She was like Vashti. She had the courage to speak up. She had the courage to say no. And now we have Esther. Esther has been crowned Queen of Persia. She's in a position of unbelievable authority. But she has a secret that the king doesn't know about. Hardly anybody knows about it, but her cousin does, Mordecai, because, you see, she's a Jew. She worships the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. But she's going to keep that a secret for now. Next week, we'll look at the 3rd chapter of the book of Esther as the story continues to develop. And as we see the hand of God working in an unseen, subtle, and powerful way. Thanks for being here. I don't know what the weather's going to be next week. I guess before this is over, I'll probably have to be inside where it's nice and warm. But it's beautiful out here today. I hope you enjoy the good weather, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Be safe, wear your mask, keep your distance, wash your hands, and we're going to make it through this together. God bless you. Thank you for joining us for our Bible study on the book of Esther.